All right, I think we're going to get started. So my name is Paula Neves, and I'm the lead for the Center for Living Organ Donation. We have been around since 2018, and our mission is to improve access to living organ donation, living kidney donation, and living liver donation. Today's presentation is part of our regular webinar series. The topic today is on our anonymous, non-directed living liver donation program, and we're very, very fortunate to be joined today by Dr. Nasia Selzner, who is a transplant hepatologist and also medical director of the live donor liver transplant program. She will be taking us through the experiences of the program through the first 100 donations. So welcome, Dr. Selzner, and I'll turn it over to you to run through the presentations. We do have an opportunity at the end of this webinar for questions. We've received some questions in advance, so we'll address those, and then may also open it up to others who are on this call if you have questions. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Selzner. Dr. Selzner?
Thank you, Paula, and good morning, everyone. This is really a pleasure to be here with those of you who made it to the actual webinar, and hopefully some others will be able to listen to it and enjoy this presentation around anonymous living donation. And as you know, we are very fortunate to have done over now, or we can say over 100 anonymous living donors. And the way I used to call them is the 100 superheroes out there who are with their cap flying around and just came in and helped and went on to live their lives. And I will show you at the end why do I think after all this that they are superheroes. So basically during this webinar we are going to discuss what is the definition of anonymous living donor, what are the criteria to be a donor in general, living donor and anonymous living donor, what are the characteristics of those anonymous living donor and a bit of their outcomes, and what we are hoping to do in the future. So this is a little bit a history of living donor liver transplant in Toronto. This is on this left-hand side. That is our very first live donor donor here, the dad who gave to his daughter back in 1989, and the three surgeons who were involved in the surgery are here, and you may recognize the young Dr. Cattrall on this picture, who was involved in the very first case of living donor liver transplantation along with Dr. Greg and Dr. Severino, and this dad donated to his child, who at that time was a child at with biliary atresia at Sick Kids Hospital, and since then has graduated from Sick Kids and is currently followed in our adult program and is doing quite well. And then about a year ago, we celebrated our 1,000 living donor liver transplantation. And that's a little less young Dr. Cattrall, but the same Dr. Cattrall who was also involved in the 1,000 case. This is a little bit the numbers in terms of the transplantation in our program, starting in 2000 when living donor liver transplantation has been officialized, and we start introducing this program with the adults. And as you can see, and the blue side is representing the number of the deceased donor liver transplantation in the program, and the lighter beige color box represent the living donors. And you can see that since the program started in 2000, we have gradually increased the living donation. But most importantly, over the last 3-4 years, the number has significantly increased. We went from 54 to 62, 79, and last year was one of our highest number of 85 live donor liver transplantation in Toronto. And we do hope that this number will continue to increase. And this is my only slide regarding the recipient side of living donor liver transplantation. When we looked at the 1,000 living donor transplant and compared their outcome for the recipient with the deceased donor liver transplantation, the red line is the living donor recipient, and the blue line is the outcome of deceased donor liver transplant recipient. And we have now 20 years of follow-up with them. And as you can see here, the outcome is certainly similar, but at the beginning is definitely better for those who received a living donation, with a significant difference, mainly because they get access to transplant sooner before they get too sick for transplantation. So these are the criteria, general criteria for a donor to be a living donor. We usually ask them to be around the age of 16 to 60, between this age category, to be healthy, no major comorbidities. We usually want them to have a BMI below 30. And if they have a BMI that is above 35, we typically don't start their workup. And if they are between 30 to 33, we start. I work with every single donor in this in this BMI category to help them lose weight. And if they have evidence of fat in their liver, I work with them to lose the fat content in their liver to the area where we can proceed with donation, providing that they don't have anatomically or otherwise suitable candidates. They would be, we want them to be ABO compatible. Obviously, this is not an absolute criteria, and we'll see a little later that there is other possibilities for donor who wish to donate to someone who is not from the same blood group. And most importantly, the donor should be able to provide informed consent before we proceed. Next slide. So now let's talk about this webinar, which is about anonymous living donation. And in the past, the terminology that has been used to describe this anonymous donor has always mixed the word altruism and altruism donor. What is altruism? It's a word that is derived from Latin, alteri, which means other people or somebody else. And generally, the meaning of this word is an action performed by an individual to benefit others without any intention of selfishness, with no expectation of rewards. So that's the description of altruism. And I do believe, and many transplant professionals and programs believe that this terminology applies actually to any donor, whether or not they are related or unrelated. It's still an act of gift with no expectation for rewards. And therefore, the terminology around anonymous living donors has now more changed toward a donation with no biological or emotional connection to a recipient. And there is two categories. In both instances, the identity of the donor remains unknown to the recipient at the time of the donation and onwards, if that's the wish of the donor and the recipient. And it could be a direct donation if an anonymous donor come forward and wants to donate to a particular recipient that they have learned of through various channels. Or it could be non-direct if a donor come forward and would just want to donate to any child or any adult on the waiting list who need a transplant without having any knowledge of some particular recipient in mind. So how did the anonymous living donor started? Well, I know that many of you know this story, but for those who may not be aware, This all started back in 2005. So our program for living donation started in 2000. From 2000 to 2005, we did a number of living donor liver transplantation, and they were all donors who donated to someone that they knew they were biologically or emotionally related to those recipients, until this man came forward in 2005 and challenged us. And his challenge was restricting donation to those with a biologic or emotional connection with the recipient. He confirmed, asserted that there is an independent ability to make well-informed autonomous decision about voluntarily health risk, and saving life of others is most important human values. And he was heard, and there was a lot of discussion because we did not have any really program. Our program wasn't set up at that time to accept this type of gifts, all the stakeholders came together to listen to this man and his wish to donate. And there has been involvement of several group of people to discuss, and eventually they all agreed that his wish is legitimate. What is he asserting to us does make sense. And he went on to donate anonymously a year later, or for that year. This has opened the door to the Toronto Anonymous Donor Program. This first case was published in American Journal of Liver Transplantation, and the case report was accompanied by ethical justification. I'm sure you all agree that because of the novelty of this request, the input of our ethics was extremely important to navigate this. And at that time, Linda Wright was involved in this case, and she reported the case report with the ethical justification. And these are the criteria that were sort of decided upon for selection of this anonymous donor: history of altruistic behavior, high level of motivation to donate, logical, rational reasons to want to be a donor, no expectation of obviously secondary benefit, provision of voluntarily informed consent, willingness to remain confidentiality, to maintain confidentiality, no evidence of increased risk or negative psychiatric or psychological outcome, family support of the donor's decision to donate anonymously. So those are the criteria that were set. And I can tell you, since until now, no other program has come with any other criteria, and these are remaining still the criteria that are largely adopted by everyone in terms of selection of anonymous donor. And it's all, sorry, go back a second, and it's all based on consideration of donor autonomy, donor risk, and donor benefit, and their informed consent. So after this man challenged our program, when we did our very first case, the program has significantly grown over the years. Again, there was periods of a little bit up and down. There were years like in 2000, we haven't done any, and it sort of remained a little bit in the range of less than 10 anonymous donation per year, until the last few years where we have had a significant growth in our program. And we see part of this as we go on forward. In 2020, we have done 16 anonymous donors surgery. In the last year, we did 14. And these were all despite the challenge related to COVID. And that's the program in our program in Canada. And then this is an article that was recently published about a year ago, where they looked at the US. The living donor program in the US have had a few challenges related to a couple of deaths of the donor at the time of surgery, or that significantly altered the living donation in the US. Their numbers significantly dropped. But again, they now acknowledge that this is an important mean to help recipient in need, and they have started to rebuild the program. And in fact, there was a consensus conference back in October as to how they can help increase even further the living donation in the US. And as a result, their living donor generally is increasing, and the number of the living anonymous donation is increasing. I want to caution you that the number 40 here is all the US transplant program. It doesn't mean that one program done 40 and passed by us. It's many programs pulling together their numbers, arriving to a number 40. Next. So since the program has grown, there have been a few of these anonymous donors who have, after their donation, have taken the challenge or the goal of increasing and spearheading the benefit of anonymous living donation. And I'm sure you are all familiar with Heather. I see her nodding and her smiling on my screen. So Heather definitely has been a tremendous advocate for anonymous living donation. She is part, or maybe founder, of this chopped liver group of donors who altruistic Canadian that donated a part of their liver to the stranger to save their life. She was featured by Andre Picard in 2019, and I think Heather says her story very well. She became aware of anonymous donation when she read about this young child in the newspaper who needed desperately a liver donor, and that was the time where she put down her newspaper and say, I have to do something. She will tell us more about that, more details herself. So with the growth of the program, once we have reached the number 50, we decided to report that. This was the biggest number done ever in the Western countries, or anywhere around the world for what matters, where we did 50 anonymous living donors liver transplantation. And we reported that in Journal of Hepatology. So of these 50 donors, 30% of them, or 15, so less than half of the donors, were directing to someone that they heard were in need of transplant, and then about 70% were non-directed donor. They simply wished to donate to someone who was an adult or a child in need for transplant. This is the characteristic of those first 50 donors. Their median age is around 38. There is an equal distribution between female and male donors, anonymous donors. Their median BMI is 24. 50% of them had some previous surgery. 68% or 70% of them had a previous altruistic actions. As I say, 30% of them were directed donors, 70% were non-directed donor. And about 50% of these donors donated to a child, and the remaining of them donated to an adult. This is the sociodemographic characteristic of this first anonymous donor, and the bar graph represents the donors, and the line is Ontario's population, average population. So as you can see here, majority, almost 95% of all the donors, or 90% of the anonymous donor, are Caucasian. Majority of them have a university degree, And in terms of many of them are professionals, managers, or have a clerical job, etc. The most important part of this study was to look at the personality trait of this anonymous donor, and the study was focused on the Big 5 personality test, which looks at 5 different components: neuroticism, openness, consciousness, extraversion versus introversion, agreeableness. Next slide, please. And when they looked at the 50 donors, they realized that the majority of these donors tested very high in terms of consciousness. They are reliable, they are well organized, they are self-disciplined, very careful. In terms of agreeableness, good nature, sympathetic, forgiving, courteous, and they score very low in terms of neuroticism, insecurity, worrying, nervous. So they scored very, very little in these domains. In terms of the donor risk for anonymous donor, the risk were very similar to all the other living donor. We generally say that there is a risk of about 30% morbidity with living donor surgery. This is probably a little overestimated, and it includes anything from having a wound issues or a hernia, all the way to major complications such as a clot in the legs, a clot in the lung, etc. In terms of mortality, I think we are all aware, and I don't need to discuss that at length. In our program, we never had a death of a donor. We take pride of the rigorous assessment that we have in place, of the rigorous check and balances that we have, and rigorous follow-up and observation of the donor throughout their whole surgery, post-donation in hospital, and the first few months after surgery, to ensure that they remain safe. Their safety remains our #1 priority. And when you look at the overall outcome of this 50 donor in terms of the surgical outcome, there was not much difference with our general donor. They usually stay around 6 days in hospital on average. Only 1 out of the 50 needed to be readmitted to hospital within 30 days. And really, in terms of some of their complications are listed here, but they are very similar to any type of living donor, and generally very low risk of morbidity. So when we look at the reason for donation, these are through interviews. Many of the donors stated that they believe the donation, or they perceive it as a moral duty. Some personalize the experience of the unknown recipient and feeling that they hope someone else would be doing the same with them should they become ill. Some wish to give back, acknowledging that they are having a privileged life, and this is their way to donate to give back to society. And in terms of donor experience, this is a study that was led by a group of Dr. Abby, our head psychiatrist, who works closely with all the anonymous donors as well. And they have interviewed close to 30 donors about their challenges and their experience, anonymous donor. And the result of the study was that most of the donors expressed that despite some short-term challenges, living donation or anonymous donation allow them to deepen bonds with others, particularly strengthen their relationship with their loved ones. They had a significant appreciation for their own personal strength, whether it was physical or a mental strength through this experience of donation and post-donation. They felt that this experience was similar to generativity, having children, or legacy building per se. And many also expressed that the act of donation allowed them to have a clear, more evident life direction after this surgery. This is another study from Dr. Abi's group where they particularly looked at the anonymous live liver donors and their perception of their surgical scars. And that's again an interview-based study of 26 anonymous living donor, semi-structured qualitative interview. And the main theme that came from these interviews, particularly in relation to their surgical scars, was the symbol of pride, reminder of their experience, prompt for recipient-related thoughts, awareness tool. But there are some that expressed the risk related to anonymity. And the conclusion of the study was that generally the donor did not voice any body image or cosmetic concern due to their scars. Instead, there was discussion about the negative aspect of scarring centered around the identifying nature of their scars. And some of the recommendation was whether or not the donors, anonymous donor, would need to be more prepared in terms of the possibility of cosmetic surgery in order to avoid this risk of anonymity for them. For food for thought and discussion later. These are some of the narrative of the donors themselves. It's the most important thing that I have done with my life so far. The entire experience has been kind of really falling in love with my own body again. And the best experience in my life came from doing that. So these are all words from anonymous donors that were expressed, and I have just copied them. So what is the impact of this donation from a recipient standpoint? I think it's important to talk a little bit about this generous gift of donation, anonymous donation. How do the recipient and caregiver of this recipient feel about this? And this is a study that was focused mainly in the pediatric side of the recipients, looking at, again, through interview of the caregivers, pediatric liver transplant recipient families after anonymous donation. Paula, please. And overall, the way the recipient family of these children expressed themselves was like an emotional turbulence. And in terms of the timeline pre-transplant, the feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, worry, emotional turbulence, not knowing what will happen to your child before transplant, whether or not they are able to survive this. At the time of transplant, where they are aware, they made aware that there is an anonymous donor and they can go ahead with the surgery. The experience that they describe as a feeling of shock, surprise, relief, no hesitation in accepting organs from an anonymous donor. And post-transplant, when all the storms settle down and they are able to breathe and think, their feeling change, perspective shifting, in-depthness to their donors, concern for the donor well-being, and overwhelming feelings of gratitude toward these anonymous donors. I think it all says it. And the impact, again, from a recipient, these are again some of the words that we have copied from their interview. The donor is my son's second parent, mother or father. The donor saved my child. Without their liver, my son wouldn't be here today. When we go to bed and I see my daughter sleeping, I think it's all because of them. You know, I kiss my daughter's belly and I know that's the donor inside her. I was shocked that people actually would do that. It was just mind-blowing. It just blew my mind, still does. I still can't get over that someone would do that. And I think these are all really very strong, powerful statements toward what they feel toward these anonymous donors. So now I'm going to change a little bit, shift and talk about how anonymous donors learn even about living donation and how do they become forward. In the past, before the social media become a thing, people used to start to use all kind of means to try to bring up the need for a loved one to have a transplant. Those who could afford, I guess, could put up a big billboard asking for a liver or a kidney. But those who couldn't really would walk around themselves with a billboard requiring for, asking for help. And then the idea of the public solicitation and social media started to rise with the development and the social media becoming a more present part of the life of all the individual. And these are some of the examples of the social media campaign. This is the story of the two twins, the Wagner twins, that was splashed around the social media and raised a lot of awareness, and a lot of donors came forward to help one of the twins because the dad could only give to one and the other one still needed a transplant. And what are the advantages of using the public solicitation? I personally think that that the advantages of this public solicitation is it leads to access to an organ that would not otherwise have been available for donation. It benefits the direct recipient, but every transplant reduces the demand on the waiting list. And it increases the awareness of organ shortage and may elicit more donors for other recipients. So these are some of the advantages of public solicitation. Next slide. And we all know that social media has become a big part of everyone's life. This is 4.2 million people every day are using social media. And the advantage of the social media is that it's a low barrier to entry, it's cheap. We can all create a account on Facebook or Instagram or whatever and solicitate for help. It has a greater dissemination of power dissemination, sorry. It's a form of indirect asking, and that's a big thing because many recipients don't have the ability to ask directly, even from their loved one, to donate. They feel it's a big ask. And it has been proven beneficial in raising awareness in many other circumstances or many other medical situation where awareness raising was quite important. Next slide. We all remember the challenge of the ice bucket, where this man and his family have gone through this experience of receiving the ice bucket on their head to raise awareness for ALS. And just by doing so on social media, it has become a significant awareness raising and raising also money for the ALS. And I bet many people on this room have been through this challenge of throwing ice bucket on their head and donate to this cause. Or there are also other causes that use similarly social media for raising awareness, like this hot sauce challenge for raising awareness for autoimmune diseases. What are the risks of a public solicitation? I guess that there are risks from both sides, for donor and the recipient. And if from a recipient standpoint, the risk is the taking away their privacy. You have to put your life out there, and obviously by doing so, you don't you put a lot of your private information. It's always a one-sided anonymity because your life is out there, is in public. You're no longer really anonymous. And in some instances, it could create a beauty contest. People would try, recipient would try to put out the better pictures, the better looks, the better families, and it can create some sort of beauty contest out there. For the donor, the risk is there is no regulation over social media. There is risk that there would be a lot of false information on the from the recipient on their website, and there is no way for them to really check that. And obviously, it's there is need for an informed consent again. So this was my slides about social media and public solicitation, and I would like to switch now about anonymous living donation and how that helps to open other doors in terms of living donor liver transplantation. This is a well-known story where this man needed a liver transplant. His wife, sorry, came forward to be a donor, obviously, and unfortunately, she was not a blood match for him and could not donate. And at that time, we thought about this idea of a paired exchange for him. So he is recipient. This is his donor, and his donor was not the right blood group. And the idea was that his donor would donate to someone else with the same blood group, and instead someone else would give to him. And that someone else is this amazing anonymous donor who came forward and donated to him, and his wife donated to someone else on the waiting list who needed a transplant. And that was the very first liver paired exchange that take place in North America, and we reported that subsequently. So that is where also this anonymous donor can open a door to a lot more liver transplantation, and not just by donating to someone, but they can create a chain of paired exchange that could increase significantly the ability for more recipients to receive a transplant. Next. And I am going to put one slide here because I guess that some may have the question regarding donating over and over again. When we published our study with the 50 anonymous donor back in 2015, there were 2 editorials that were published in 2 different journals, and this one was actually published in Nature, which is one of the highest impact journal written by Dr. Fisher, where he really compared this anonymous donor to the Good Samaritan Strangers. It's a very beautiful written article reviewing our program and some of the unique aspects of anonymous donation in our program. And he highlighted in this article that it is reasonable for a single individual to undergo 2 living donation. Subsequently, obviously, they cannot give 2 kidneys or twice their liver, but it's possible to donate a liver or a kidney and a kidney sequentially, and that is totally possible, and we all know, and we have people here on this webinar today that have gone through this experience as well. And I just want to finish by saying that although we have a lot of experience in terms of the short-term outcome of our donors, We are actively working on increasing our knowledge about their long-term outcome. Again, you know, their safety is our highest priority, and we would like to make sure that over 10, 15, 20 years post-donation, they would remain safe and don't have any complication from their donation. And we did a pitch last year, actually, together with Dr. Fleming, to go back and look at the outcome of our living donors, all of them, and using a provincial-based database that are anonymous, and link them to our living donors and try to understand better their health, physical health, mental health, psychological health, etc. And we do hope that over the next year or so, we would be able to have further information on that. And we also have changed a little bit our program, and we now start following again all our donors with the goal of following them at long term. So on this, I'm gonna, this is my next, the next one is my, the last couple of slides. I think that the rate of anonymous living liver donation is increasing in North America. In Canada, definitively. Donor selection must consider autonomy, safety, and benefit for the donor. It's donors, anonymous donor definitively expressed that the donation was a catalyst for positive psychosocial growth. Financial burden, maintaining anonymity, allocation of the organs needs to be considered really for further growth of that anonymous living donation. And the last slide is, this is again a quote from a mom, recipient of an anonymous living donor liver for their child, who say, how does one describe the person who saved my child's life? Indescribable, warrior, and superhero. And truly, I believe that all the donors, and certainly all the anonymous living donors, are the superhero with their cap, ready to do the delivery. Thank you again, and I hope that you have some question that I can answer, and or anything I can clarify.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salzner. Really, really an impressive milestone for the program and for all the living donors who made this happen. We cannot thank them, thank you who are part of today's session enough. You are saving lives, and it's really important that we recognize that. We've received a few questions in advance of this webinar, and I see we also have some comments in the chat, which I'll invite Dr. Salzner to review, and we can come back to after these questions. And then we'll open it up as well if there are any other questions that anyone wants to ask. Dr. Salzner, can you talk about who cannot become a living liver donor?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess we can say that the opposite of who can become a donor is who cannot become a living donor. So the age, obviously, if you're outside those age bracket of below 16, above 60, if you have any significant medical condition, diabetes, heart problem, coronary artery disease, those are really conditions where we cannot accept someone as a donor. And again, one may ask the question, well, you know, if someone has diabetes or hypertension, or they have all kind of surgeries, why can they not be a donor? The simple answer is because safety of our donor is our first mission, and we cannot take any risk of putting someone's life at risk if they have other health condition. Anatomically, there are circumstances where a donor, even though they are perfectly healthy, they are the right blood group, they cannot donate, unfortunately, simply because the vessels or the bile ducts are lining up in a way that they don't, they are not easily dividable by our surgeons. And when we say anatomically someone is not a suitable candidate, it's not lightheartedly. The scans are reviewed over and over, and I think everyone who is here and listening knows that our surgeons are extremely skilled and they don't really back off easily. When they do, again, it's just because they believe that this is not possible and would take too much risk for a donor. Then there are circumstances related to the volume of the donor, etc., which could make a potential donor, not a suitable candidate to move ahead.
Thank you. Are there any restrictions with respect to residence of the living donor candidate?
Residence means where they live?
Yes.
Yes. So there is obviously we would accept to do living donation for people out of province. If they are in provinces where living donation is not an option for them, we are willing to consider the transplant the recipient with a living donor, as long as obviously the recipient meet the criteria for transplantation, and that province is not offering living donation to them. We are willing to consider them, absolutely, and the residence is not an issue.
Great, thank you. All right, well, the next question relates to specific advice for living donors or candidates regarding alcohol use, regarding diet, exercise, mental health. Is there anything that we specifically advise donor candidates before surgery or after surgery regarding all of these factors?
Yes. So in terms of, yes, we do. In terms of the general health, we ask the donor to remain and continue to remain as healthy as possible, which means that if they are drinking, we ask them to stop drinking when they come forward and they are done their scans and we know they are potential candidate to move ahead. So we ask them at that time to stop drinking, stop smoking, and also we ask them to stop smoking and drinking, particularly drinking for the first 3 months after donation, until their liver has fully regenerated and grown back to their full size, in order to avoid any hit to the small volume of the liver that is remaining after surgery. In terms of the diet, we don't necessarily make any restriction of the diet. Again, the idea here is to have healthy diet, and for exercise prior to donation, no restriction in terms of the exercise. Post donation, we ask them to keep themselves as active as possible, but avoid lifting any heavy lift, not more than 10 pounds, 5 to 10 pounds during the first 3 months, simply because we don't want them to develop a hernia on their wound. So these are the advice, really, to try to keep themselves as from a physical and mental health in best shape prior to surgery, and then after surgery, hopefully for life, but certainly at least for the first few months after donation, until the liver is gone back to its normal size and they are back to a regular life again.
Great, thank you. This next question is a question that we get very frequently, which is around communication between anonymous or non-directed donors, or donors who subsequently learned who their recipient is and so wish to communicate with that recipient. Could you review what the guidelines are for communications between donors and recipients at a high level?
So prior to donation, we obviously, this is anonymous donation, so there should be no contact between the donor and the recipient. Post donation, again, while they are in hospital and they are after surgery, we do everything that is possible in our hand to maintain separation between the donor and the recipient and carry on with their anonymity, etc. Once they have the surgery is done, both have recovered and they are back to their life. If they wish, both of them to have to meet with each other, then they can do that. We can help them, but it has to be from both sides. There are possibility for them to exchange. For example, the recipient can write letter to a donor, to their donor, anonymous donor, the same way that recipient of a deceased donor is writing letter to their family. That option exists, and we facilitate exchange of letter. Generally, these are like content and limited number of exchange, because again, there are some facts that can be described, but you know, we can try to exchange more than one letter, but it's many people are not interested, in fact, to carry on with this in this direction. So this is that is how things run. For example, when that slide that I show about the paired exchange, obviously one of the donor was an anonymous donor and remained anonymous up to after surgery, but then later on both parties expressed wish to meet, and we helped them to meet and get to know each other, and they carried some contact with each other afterwards. But that was way after after surgery, and when both donor and recipient have recovered, and they both actually expressed that they wanted to meet.
Great, thank you. And I guess this last question that was submitted in advance is around developments in research. So one of the topics that has come up recently is around xenotransplantation. Do you see any developments on the horizon that are going to impact the need for a living liver donor or living liver donation in the future?
So I think xenotransplantation is definitely an interesting area, and certainly there are some development. But as you say, it's still development is still very experimental. The result at long term is not known, and I don't see that replacing living donation anytime in the near future on the horizon. Maybe in 10, 15, 20 years from now, that may become, if the science is proven to be valid, if there are no long-term consequences and the results are promising, yes, but I don't see this, at least in the immediate future, being an option that can replace living donation. So unfortunately, we still do need living donors and anonymous donors to save many people's life until this science from other sides develop and demonstrate to be efficient and works well.
Great, thank you. And I see we have some comments in the chat. I don't know, Dr. Salzner, if there are any comments there that you would like to address. I'd like to invite the participants in today's call. If there's anyone that has questions for Dr. Salzner, please unmute and feel free to ask your question. And a reminder that this call is being recorded and will be available online following the session.
Hi, Paula, this is Len.
Go ahead, Len.
Hi, can I just confirm that there is, that for an anonymous donor, a non-directed donor, that at some point in time, there is an opportunity to meet with your recipient? I hadn't heard that before.
I think that, again, you know, we can facilitate and we can ask. But again, you know, it has to be a two-sided direction, and is a case-to-case, case-by-case, situations.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Len. Any other questions or comments?
So Heather is asking, when a person applies as a directed donor and isn't needed, what happened next? Are they invited to become non-directed donors? Yes, so if someone come forward and apply to to donate to someone. I mean, generally there is, you know, every situation is a little bit different. So if, let's say, a sister is applying to donate to her sister and is not a candidate for donation, we generally do not ask them, do you want to donate anonymously? In some circumstances, this may come up by themselves. But if they are turned down for a specific recipient, is generally for particular anatomical reason rather than the blood group issues, and therefore they wouldn't be a good donor at all, or for medical reason, or for too much fat in their liver, you know, these reasons that are not really reversible. If a donor, an anonymous donor come forward and want to direct, let's say, to a child that they become aware of through social media, and that child in the meanwhile get another transplant, definitely we do ask them, do you want to donate to someone else anonymously? And many actually express their wish, or some may say no.
Well, that's great to hear. So say someone's done a public appeal and they generate lots of potential donors for themselves. If some of those potential donors may be suitable to continue, then they,
yes,
I know there used to be an email, just an email that would go to all of them that would basically just close their file.
Yeah, no, that's no longer the case. We do ask, but again, you know, many of these anonymous donors that come forward to as a result of the appeal, they are generally not good donor for medical reason or age reason or etc. And therefore we don't ask them the question. But if someone seems otherwise perfectly healthy and a suitable donor, we do ask through just verbally, if that doesn't work, would you be able to donate to someone else?
That's great. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather. Other comments either in the chat or from those who are part of this call?
So the question regarding how do we choose our recipient? So as a general rule, the recipients are all, the organs are offered first to pediatric donor recipients. So kids have always priority. If there is a kids on the waiting list and there is an anonymous donor, we go to the kid first. If a donor, and then many anonymous donor prefer only to donate to a child, so that would be easy. And if we don't have a child at that time on the waiting list, we tell them, you know, we keep your child, we keep your file, we come back to you in 6 months, a year, if there are other, there is need. Some have no preference and they are willing to help an adult. And in this situation, we try to choose a recipient that has a MELD score, which does not reflect how sick they are. They are in need of transplant, but the score that allows allocation of deceased donor for them is low generally. And also the recipients who have they had donors in the workup that did not pan out for other reasons. So it's a combination of various criteria in selection of the recipient. Typically, again, smaller size people who won't attract a organ from deceased donor group, those who have lower MELD group, and those who have a combination of all these and also had donors that did not work out for them.
Great. Thank you. And I see we've reached the end of our time. So I'd like to thank all of you who joined us today on our call and eventually online. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Anazia Salzner for her presentation and the expertise that she shared with us. Obviously, the work that's being done is a reflection of the expertise, the knowledge of the team in the Living Donor Liver program. And as I said earlier, the tremendous generosity of living liver donors and candidates who step forward to donate to somebody in need. So thank you very much for your participation today, and I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you for joining us.